Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we welcome Pico Iyer to our little program here. He is the author of a lot of books, among them 2 novels, 8 works of nonfiction, including Video Night in Kathmandu, The Lady and the Monk, The Global Soul, and The Open Road. But today he's here to talk about his latest book. And that book is called, very interesting, strange title, The Man Within My Head, published by our wonderful friends at Alfred A. Knopf, and we're really glad you stopped by.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Jim.
Things going well on the tour?
Yeah, because this is the beginning of the tour, so I'm still a bit of a human being. This time next week, I'll be a cardboard cutout version of myself.
Well, it's good we got you at the top of your game. This book, The Man Within My Head, with this strange title, when the stuff came in from the publisher, I said, what in the name of heck is this?
Excellent.
And then I found out that it's a subject that interests me a great deal because it is the story of your relationship, which goes beyond an appreciation and an understanding of a wonderful author, Graham Greene, and how that appreciation and that relationship is related to how you feel about your father. And it's quite a book.
Thank you.
It's quite a book. I had a lot of fun with it. In a previous conversation, you talked about why Graham Greene interests you so much. And you said in part that you like the fact that he's more interested in questions than in answers, and always suggests that it's what you do that's more important than what you believe. Kindness is more vital to him than doctrine. I liked his sense of mischief, his loyalty to his friends, his sense of fun, and mostly his wisdom and himself. I always feel that he brought as much sympathy and understanding to others as he brought unsparing honesty to himself. Now, I understand what you're talking about in terms of faith, but it saddened me reading the book to see that illustrated over and over again. That is, that he had no faith, and yet he had a relationship with God that was quite powerful.
Yes, beautifully said. He had no faith, but he didn't believe in having not faith either. So he thought that religion could be a form of escape if you raced to easy answers, but he also believed that atheism, or just writing off the possibility of religion, was something of a cop-out. So, I think a lot of people who really take God seriously are in a perpetual dance between faith and doubt, and I think that's exactly where Graham Greene was. And in that regard, he's probably closer to a monk than many people, because I think it's like in any love affair. Half the time you're convinced that this person is the greatest one you've ever met, and half the time you're storming out of the room enraged. And I think that's how he was with his faith. Yeah.
His understanding that what you do is more important than what you believe. I mean, that sets up a whole ethical standard, a whole ethical life. And the point that, or one of the examples you give of that stuck in my mind is his relationship with Muriel Spark. Can you tell us that?
Well, it's an example of his clandestine kindness. I think Graham Greene was one of those odd people who made a big show of being a sinner, and whose friends actually thought he wasn't exactly a saint, but he was a very good man pretending to be a wicked man. So Muriel Spark was a fellow author, younger than he was, and it was only after his death, at his funeral, that she disclosed that, unbeknownst to anybody, for month after month, he had sent her a small amount of money so that she could really try to be a writer. And so that she wouldn't feel that she was just a charity case, he sent her a case of wine every month too, so that he was presenting himself as a friend, not just as an anonymous donor.
What a great idea. What a great idea. Now, just so we know who we're talking about, Graham Greene was born in 1904. He was the fourth of 6 children, the third son, and his father was a headmaster. And that's a very important reference because one of the ongoing themes in the book is your own biography.
Yes.
Which consists of a international schooling, I would call it.
And a father who was a teacher.
And a father is a teacher.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting to me about Graham Greene is that he ran away from the school where his father was headmaster when he was 16. He failed. They caught him and brought him back. But then his parents, remarkably for middle-class England in 1920, sent him to live for 6 months with this wildly colourful dream analyst in London, and the dream analyst's glamorous, dangerously glamorous wife. And I think for the rest of his life, Graham Greene was always divided between these two fathers. The one, this mysterious, colourful, slightly roguish guy who took him into the depths of the subconscious, his shadow father, and the other, his really upstanding, pious official father. And I think that's what gives a kind of electricity and shadowness to so much of his fiction.
The interesting thing about your book is the way you handle the material. And the material is fairly serious for the most part, but you have a sense of humor.
I'm glad that comes across.
Well, here's an example. Paul, you're talking about Paul, a friend of Greene's?
Yes, and a friend of mine too.
And
yes.
a friend of yours. And this fellow recalls our friend Graham Greene this way. The first time we met, he said, we talked about infidelity. I bared my soul to him. I had this image before we met of a power figure, shamanic. But he didn't type, he didn't drive, and he couldn't boil an egg. I love that line. He couldn't boil an egg. I've never seen that as a put-down of somebody to having little or no talent. I have to remember that. He couldn't boil an egg.
And there's a bit of a sequel to that story later on in the book, because Paul told me that first meeting with Graham Greene, when Paul spoke about infidelity, he confessed to Greene, because Greene was a kind of father-confessor figure to many people, that Paul's wife had an affair while Paul was out traveling around the world. And Greene said, "Did you leave her?" And Paul said, "No." And Greene said, "You should have." And then a little later he said, I would have left her. And then a little later he said, and I would have regretted it the rest of my life. So Greene has that wonderful doubleness. He's offering advice, and then he's saying that owner's vice would have broken his heart. So not many people, I think, are wise enough and honest enough to hold both those in their head at the same time.
You know, the book, as you well know, your publisher says that the book is almost as much about your father as it is about Greene. In my reading, I don't buy that. But there's much about your father, and just enough to make me wish that you had, concentrated on him in a way that would have been easier for me.
Yes, and you're not the only one to say that. But I think a part of the point of this book is that we all have these people in our heads whom we've never met, but we know their intimate secrets better than we know the intimate secrets of our parents. And that one of the things that's interesting is I probably know a lot more about Graham Greene than I know about my father.
Okay, hold that. The Man Within My Head is an absolute joy to read. When we come back, we're going to show you why this is true.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
And Jim Foster is talking today about The Man Within My Head, a wonderful book by Pico Iyer, published by Alfred A. Knopf. Publishers Weekly had some nice things to say about it, which is time to share. Graham Greene isn't the man essayist and novelist Iyer, Son After Dark, would choose to take up residence in his head. I would most likely fasten on someone more dashing, more decisive, less unsettled. But it's his lifelong fascination with Greene that fuels this deeply personal journey that crisscrosses the world and his own past. So you would rather have somebody else. I think you find Greene disturbing as well as fascinating, don't you?
Challenging, and that's why I like
challenging,
him.
better
yes.
word, yeah.
Yes, because I think he looked at the difficult parts in the world and the difficult parts in himself, and that's one of the hardest things to do, and he was always asking unsettling questions of himself.
And you go on, or the PW goes on to the end, as he explores, as you explore his obsession, Iyer cautiously peels back the layers of his relationship with his own father, a brilliant philosopher whose belief in mysticism Iyer did not share. But you shared a lot of other things that I think you did. I hope you did, because he's a most admirable figure as you describe him here and how he's lived his life and what he's done.
Good. And I must say I was happy when you said you wish there were more about my father in this book, because I think anybody who picks up this book looking for much about me or my father is going to be a little disappointed or feel that there's not enough. And that's mostly because I was just trying to catch something more archetypal, not really me and my father, but the way that I think most of us guys, when we're 15 years old, finding ourselves, establishing our identity, creating our destiny means moving away from our parents, rebelling against them. And then as we get older, let's say we get to 45, we look in the mirror and we see we've become our fathers. And I think most of us know some version of that.
There's that old saying that when I was 15 years old, I thought my father was the dumbest guy in the world. And now that I'm 25 years old, I'm beginning to realize how smart.
Wonderful. Well, I didn't know that saying, but that catches the book perfectly. And also, when I was 15 years old, I thought he was the person I most didn't want to become.
Yeah, get away.
Until I became him, and then I couldn't have harsh words about him anymore.
In the hands of a lesser writer, the PW reviewer goes on, the dueling father figures would dissolve into melodrama. But Iyer weaves them brilliantly, reminding us that we run from who we are, only to discover, of course, that is precisely what we can never put behind us. It takes a while to understand and realize that, doesn't it?
Yes, in life. And I think daughters are the same with their mothers. I was thinking the other day that if you're courting a young woman and you say, you look just like your mother, she's going to close the door on you. Yeah. But if you say to her, you look just like Virginia Woolf, even if Virginia Woolf is less beautiful and charismatic than her mother, she'll be really pleased. And so, I think we all bridle when people say we're similar to our parents, and yet most of us are, of course.
We are,
because
sure.
Same blood, same DNA.
You can't avoid it.
You can't run away from your own shadow.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Now, one of the things that comes up in the book is there are a number of observations that you make, not just about this relationship, but about life in general. And one of them is, was it only through another that I could begin to get at myself? So this whole notion of self-knowledge is part of maturing. And would you say that maybe the first step, or one of the first steps, is to get to know yourself through knowing others?
Yeah, because I think
it's easier.
It is.
It's easier.
It's easy. I think it's almost impossible to say, let me look at myself. And, everything by definition, you can't look within yourself. But as soon as it's externalized, as soon as you have some crooked mirror or reflection or whatever, then suddenly it's much easier to see and to acknowledge those things. And I use that verb, get at yourself, because get at has many meanings, including kind of attacking yourself as as reaching yourself.
Yeah. And at another point, you say something like this. I hope I've written this down correctly. The paradox of reading is that you draw closer to some other creature's voice within you than to the people who surround you with their surfaces every day. That is so true, I think.
Yes, well, you read every week for this program a lot, and you know that it's an interesting process because you pick up a book, and for 10 hours you travel so deeply into somebody else's head that if he's traveling deeply enough into himself, you know his most intimate guilts and terrors and habits the way you never know, for example, the intimate lives and secrets of your parents. You know that stranger better than you know your friends and family. And that's partly what this book is about. Why do I know more about Graham Greene than I know about my best friend or my father or maybe myself?
Books do it. We'll get rid of them. There's a story in the book about I think the man Lewis, who's described as your best friend from school.
Yes.
And what happened in his life is a perfect example of what you say about Graham Greene being more interested in acts of morality than in belief. What was the story?
I think he's a perfect traveling companion because anywhere we go, as soon as we arrive, war breaks out, we get in car crashes, terrible things happen. So we were one day driving in Ethiopia, there was a car crash in front of us. He raced out to help somebody, and I thought, here's a true Good Samaritan, what a hero. And once his heroism was over, he started, drinking himself into oblivion and listening to the Grateful Dead again. I thought,
well, it was only temporary.
Yes.
We have some more time to talk about this book, which pleases us. I hope it pleases you. We've been talking about The Man Within My Head by Pico Iyer, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. The book today is The Man Within My Head. The author who is with us is Pico Iyer, and the publisher is Alfred A. Knopf, one of our favorite publishers around here. For a lot of different reasons. The books are great. The authors are prepared to talk, and they also send us a folder with every book. We can keep our notes and stuff in there. The business that we were talking about at the end, I don't want to cut that story short. The story about Lewis and that person, that goes on for days. I mean, to different towns and...
Yes.
It doesn't seem, it wasn't just an overnight kind of thing.
No.
It was several days. It's very much, the Good Samaritan approach. You stay with the situation until it's taken care of.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And then I described that car crash at Ethiopia because at the end of the book, there's another car crash in which we are the victims, I and my college friend. And so I tried very hard. Every incident in this book is meant to sort of play off another incident. And so I hope to gain some added resonance from that. But I suppose the great thing about my school friend is that suddenly when he was a young boy, he found faith, and that actually allowed him to be wilder in his activities and travels than anybody I knew, because he always knew deep down invisibly where he stood.
That's interesting. That's a fascinating observation. He had great certainty about that.
Exactly. And so he knew he could really put himself out there, drink, charm the most beautiful woman in the room, because he also knew he would never actually do anything terrible. He wouldn't lose sight of what he should be doing.
As we were coming into the second segment, we're now in the third, I said that we were going to prove how wonderful the writing is in your book, and we never got to that. Could we take that up now by reading from the book?
Gladly, yes.
Okay. You want to set context on this, it might be helpful.
So this is at the end of a chapter in which I describe how when I was growing up, I was going back and forth 6 times a year by myself from the age of 9 between my father's house, set in California in the 60s when the students down the road were burning down the Bank of America and razing to the ground every foundation of society, and my boarding school in England, which was set up in 1414, where we had to recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin. So these two very, very different
Every
worlds.
day.
Every day.
Every
yes.
day.
We had to wear full morning dress to class every day.
Could you recite it now? I bet you could.
Pater Noster, quies in celis.
That's enough.
Those things stay with you forever, Jim. So I'm just talking to my wife back in Japan about, she's asking me, why are you interested in Graham Greene? And I say, all of us had been taught to take off across the world. And for me, as for him, travel was mostly a way to see more clearly the questions and shadows it was easy to look past at home. It was that he was always on the move in some deeper sense, never ready to assume he had the last word, reflexively able to see around the corner of his beliefs and to recall how he and his world looked to the person on the far side of the street. Always there was a dance in him between evasion and an almost ruthless candor, his instinct for privacy and his need to purge himself of his secrets on the page. He was one of those men who would often tell more to his unmet readers than to his oldest friends. He almost had to guard his public life, in fact, in order to have more to offer less compromised in his private. The less you let out freely to every stranger, California had taught me this, along with many of the other laws of restraint, the more and deeper the material you had to share when it most mattered. But there was something subtler going on beyond all this. He knew what it was to animate a dialogue, quivering and uncertain, connecting the two worlds he moved between, each not knowing how much to distrust or how much to be fascinated by the other. He knew how to keep alive the demands and intensity of faith by not really being part of any congregation, yet refusing to stake out the easy ground of a non-believer. He saw that he was in part the schoolmaster whose face he surely recognized whenever he caught his blurred features in a train window, and a boy committed to forging his own way in opposition to that schoolmaster, his father. Life would and could be spent in movement, in process, not settling to any fixity or doctrine, but sensing that the human challenge was something much more profound and unassimilable. So much so, in fact, that even saints might despair of figuring out the riddle and the ache.
There's one phrase in there that I'm just mad about, and that is that he was interested in keeping alive the demands and intensity of faith. I mean, believers would do well to do that, and he was a non-believer. Now, later on in the book, at page 181, if you want to look it up, you give your a kind of a summary statement. The green I carried in my head was drab-colored and loved to be invisible. Since his earliest years, his mother used to say he'd hated having attention drawn to him. He longed to disappear into the larger world. And that's what he's done, I think, but you've pulled him out in a very fascinating way, in a very fascinating book called The Man Within My Head by our guest, Pico Iyer. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.